Good evening, everybody. Glad to see everybody can make it here tonight to our monthly chairman's webinar at NAFI. I'd like to thank everybody for attending. The discussion tonight will be regulations, legislation, and us, what NAFI and flight instructors can do to help each other. Our guests tonight are Phil Poynor, NAFI's Vice President of Industry Relations and Governmental Affairs, and two very special guests, John and Martha King, who brought an issue to our attention, and we're taking the opportunity to discuss that issue and how it affects all of us as flight instructors. Before we get started, as everybody knows who's participated in these, we run these as open discussions. Currently, most of the microphones are on mute for a moment. I'd like to lay out a couple of ground rules because we've had a couple of small issues in the past. If you're not talking, please mute your microphone. What happens is we get ambient noise in the background. We had one person at a high school football game, and that was very difficult to deal with. If there's too much noise off of a particular phone, I'll have to mute it from here, and once that happens, you can't open yours up again. I have to do it from here. If you have a question you'd like to ask, feel free to jump in. There's also a chat board or a chat feature on the smart meeting control panel where you can send a question to me as the moderator and I can pass it out. But I'd rather have everybody else participate. It's a lot more fun if people jump in. And what a great opportunity to talk back to a couple of people that helped teach us all how to fly, or a lot of us how to fly, at least the ground school part. So with that, I want to thank our guests, and I think what I'll do is open up the mics. And Phil, why don't you kick it off first, please?
Okay, Bob. I was having a little bit of trouble getting logged in, so I'm not sure if you're able to hear me, but let me confirm that first.
Loud and clear.
Okay, this is Phil Poynor, and what I'll be talking to you about tonight is the efforts that NAFI is making in the government affairs area, and we'll be looking at three areas: the national representation, the activities we have on a regional level, and the activities we have on a local level. So by way of introductions, that's what I'll be talking about tonight.
And John and Martha, if you need no introduction, but go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Well, if I give you a 50-50 chance, but I'm John King.
I think they can figure that out, John.
Okay, and probably the hardest thing I've had to type in a while, you'll see a slide where I'll freeze it here in a few moments. Everybody's got a computer, is everybody knows them as John and Martha King. And of course, the cockpit photo that I selected that Gwen so graciously sent me has John in the, or Martha in the left seat. So the hardest thing I've had to type in a long time on a PowerPoint presentation is Martha and John King.
That's hard to do, isn't it?
It is.
Just doesn't seem natural.
It just doesn't seem right. It's always been John and Martha, no matter where you go, whether it's Oshkosh or when you've been out at FAST team presentations and so on and so forth.
Well, Bob, I should tell you that Martha's in the left seat of our lives. So.
You made a lot of points right there, John. Good move. Anyway, so let's start off. Phil, why don't you talk about some of the current efforts and what we're working on, and we'll go from there.
Okay, we have a number of issues since we've spun up the NAFI Government Affairs. To look at them in perspective, I'm going to break them into three areas that we work in. At the national level, most of what NAFI does is representation on various government and industry committees. Some of the ones that are currently active and producing pretty good results for flight instruction are working within FAA committees such as the Joint Steering Committee, which works on a variety of general aviation issues. We are on the ARAC, which the activities that some of you may have seen published recently in our ongoing efforts, and we'll have more to say about this tonight, is the activities with regard to practical test standards, knowledge test standards that are being combined into the new ACS or Airman Certification Standards. And the initial activities from that produced revisions to both the private and the instrument. Next up is going to be discussions about the ATP, and that committee will be, the subcommittee will be starting up here in January. Those of you that have interest in that, later in the evening, I'll let you know how you can get involved in that effort if you want to. We also are involved in a number of both industry activities and industry relations. We work very closely, for example, with AOPA on many issues, and then at other times when our issues align, we work with organizations like NBAA and NATA. At the regional level, we tend to get involved with activities. For example, we have a flight school in Colorado that brought to our attention that they've had a pending application for a 141 certificate that goes back quite a few years that to date has had no action at all taken on it, and had led us into a discussion with the FAA. Has led to the issue as one nationally of resource at the FAA, and there are some ameliorative efforts that the FAA has in place that NAFI will seek to work with the local NAFI member organizations to see if we can get those addressed. Locally, one of the activities I think we've chosen tonight for the prototype of discussing what NAFI can do and how we can assist is the issue in San Diego where there's a pending legislation in the county legislature affecting flight schools and flight instructors that's pretty duplicative of what the TSA requirements are and could be pretty burdensome and onerous to flight schools. While it's a single issue in a local jurisdiction, that's not particularly something that NAFI would be involved in. We do get involved in it in the sense that that's something that could spread very rapidly in both complementary and conflicting ways throughout the country. So we have an interest and can provide support to the local community to assist them in hopefully stemming the tide of that type of legislative activity. So that's pretty much the three areas that we're working on. I'll be glad as we go through the conversation tonight to take questions on other issues, but those will be the three that we'll be talking about tonight.
Phil, before we go any further, could you define a term for us, ARAC, please?
ARAC is an Aviation Rule-of-Making Advisory Committee. It's part of the Administrative Procedure Act. There's special legislation that allows and gives the opportunity for regulatory agencies to take input from the public, and it's the broad scope of the public. It's not just, aviators, but for example, we have the Passengers' Right organization as part of the ARAC that's dealing with rewriting pilot training standards. So it's an opportunity for the FAA to take direct face-to-face input, not just written comments at the latter stages of rulemaking. So it gives the public an opportunity to get in at the very beginning of any rulemaking activities.
Thank you, Phil. Appreciate that. And although we'll get into it in a little bit as to how NAFI members can help locally, John or Martha, you want to talk about what you brought to my attention and led to you being here tonight?
Yeah, Bob, basically what came up is that the county supervisors in San Diego County are doing a feel-good, look-good kind of action having to do with the compliance with the requirements for training foreign flight students. And there have been a lot of stories in the paper about foreign nationals somehow slipping through the TSA and the immigration and so on nets and not getting properly vetted and background checks and still getting flight training in the U.S. And the San Diego County supervisors basically are attempting to take things into their own hands, and it's really crazy because what they've got a proposed ordinance that they're going to vote on in early February that basically just says because the federal government isn't doing what it should be, we're going to force individual instructors and flight schools to do the background checks and vetting on the foreign students, which of course, we can't do. It has to be done nationally. But when you read the ordinance, all it's doing is requiring an annual certification of the by the flight instructors that they're complying with the national rules.
Just every year, the flight instructors will have to tell the county that they are complying with the federal rules. That's all there is, certification of it. And part of it came about because we have a lot of Chinese students flying in San Diego County, and they are very, very hard to hear on the radio. They're easy to hear. They're hard to understand on the radio. Sometimes I just can't imagine how a controller can understand them. And there's a bunch of people living around one of our airports, in particular, Gillespie Field in East San Diego, and they have just become anti the idea of foreign students learning to fly over their homes. And they've become organized, and they have a lot of propaganda, and they've gone to the county, and the county's fix on it, the supervisors, is that we're going to make flight instructors certify they're complying with the regulations they already have to comply with. And that's it. It's just going to be burdensome with no benefit. It's a look good, feel good regulation, as Martha says, but no benefit to anybody at all, except just one more layer of bureaucracy on flight instructors and flight schools.
But the way that the county supervisors and the local media are pitching it is that quote, the federal government has not been able to force flight schools to do the background checks they're supposed to do, so we, the county, are going to force them to do it instead. But then, of course, when you read the ordinance, all they're saying is you have to comply with the national rules. So, I mean, it's as I said, it's a feel-good, look good to the constituents thing without any value other than frustration and hassle, particularly for those flight instructors who might not realize even that there is such a requirement.
Yeah, if I came and did some instructing in your neck of the woods and I wasn't aware of it, I don't know how else to say it, but I wouldn't be aware of it. You don't know what you don't know.
How would you ever know? You don't know what you don't know, and this is not something you would expect to find. I have no idea what the penalties, if any, are. It doesn't say anything in the ordinance as to any penalties, but I don't know whether that means there aren't any or what goes on.
Or they're just going to turn your name into the TSA for the bad list. That's a good point. So let's go back. Let's work this from national down to regional, down to local, and then back out. Phil, if you want to expand on at the national level, what we're doing, and I know you had an overview of it, but also how our membership can help us find issues that we should be working with, or what input they can provide. Phil?
Are you there?
There you are. Yeah, I think you were on mute for a moment. Okay, there you are.
One of the difficulties that NAFI has at the national level of dealing with local issues like this is simply having an awareness of the problem. So one of the things that we really look for our members to do is to call things like this to our attention. Once it has been, what NAFI needs to do is, with the resources that we have available to us, is take a look at what can we do to assist and what type of activities can we either lead or support. On the national level, we do have one of the committees that we participate in, and it hasn't met since I started acting as government affairs. The first meeting I'll be involved with is later in the spring. But we do have relationships with the TSA. And one of the things we could probably do is make connections between a local effort in San Diego and the folks at the TSA to see what exactly is being required. And in many cases, what's being offered at the local level turns out to be preempted. Many of you are probably aware of the immigration efforts that the state of Arizona did that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And one of the principles of law is that if the federal government has acted in an area, the local jurisdictions are preempted from taking any kind of activity in that area. So that's one of the things I think we would strongly recommend to the folks in San Diego that they work with. Working it down to the regional level, and in this case there's not a lot of regional activity because it is such a specific local issue, but it could apply regionally as well. For example, if a state was trying to impose the same activity, would be to try to identify folks that are active and have an interest in the legislation or the rulemaking or whatever type of activity is taking place, to give them some legal support or guidance, not really legal support, and we wouldn't be their attorney, but we could provide reading of law and what type of activities locally or regionally might be successful in getting the legislature to change its mind or to modify what they're trying to do. But the biggest thing we can do is help call attention, take what the local informant, if you will, has given us by way of information and broadcast it on a broader platform to make sure that folks in the region are familiar and aware that something is happening. When you get down to the national level, and this type of activity in the county legislature is definitely local. There's the old saying about all politics is local, and this is really a good example of that. From an effectiveness point of view, this is going to have to be dealt with by folks that are in the community, that are actually voters for these folks. They can go in and work with their own county legislators. Again, with NAFI providing information and strategies and techniques that can work, giving the technical support as to what the issues are. And very often, most legislative activity does have a public comment period where there will be a public hearing. And NAFI could play a role in helping to coordinate and provide information so that you have a show-up of interested parties that's large enough to make a point. And there are things like getting everybody coordinated in a common colored shirt, signage, that kind of thing that can draw attention to it. And one thing most politicians hate is local attention that seems to be adverse to what they're proposing to do. And NAFI can assist with that type of response. In this case, since the time frame is pretty close at hand, I think it's really important to try to get face time with the local legislators, especially if anyone in San Diego has personal connection with the legislature, someone that they've known in business or related to or through their church or social clubs, and to go in and make the case personally and explain to them that the issue isn't as it's presented to be, and the solution certainly isn't a solution to anything, that it's something that we're already required to do. So those are the three kinds of things that NAFI can do, and specifically what we could do to assist with the San Diego situation.
Okay. At a national level or a regional level, is there anything that our members, and I know you've got your ear to the ground, Phil, but is there anything at the national or regional level that members can do, or they think there's something that can help bring it to our attention or assist us, or we can assist them?
There are a couple of other issues that we're working with currently. One popped up somewhat out of the clear blue earlier in the month, and that's the requirement for flight training devices and the various category of everything below a level 3 and below flight training device. So it's the level 3, 1 to 3 flight training devices, the ATDs, the BATDs, and the AATDs. There's been a fair amount of misinformation put out there that got into the press and is migrated as what the intent of all this is and so on. But we are trying to engage on that. There was a meeting just this morning on that we spoke with AFS 800 and AFS 810. They're the two organizations that are putting forward this. But we would like to get feedback from the members as to how that would affect them. And one of the areas that has come to our attention on that is this issue is the requirement that all of those devices are going to have their letters of authorization to be used as loggable flight time end next January. And in order to continue using the devices, you would have to apply for a new letter of authorization either through the manufacturer of the device or as the operator. But one of the areas that we're concerned about that we want to get into the mix is the overall awareness that people have of the advisory circular 61-136 that sets forward the requirements for operating these devices. And then to also get feedback is if you go onto the Federal Register and read the notice of change of policy that you can find on the Federal Register that's dated, I believe, the 7th of January. I'm sorry, on the 2nd of January. And then give us feedback as to what impact that could have on your organization. That would be very beneficial to us in terms of engaging with the membership. Let me turn it back to you for a second, Bob. Just that was a lot to say at one time, so it's probably a good time to get feedback if somebody has something to say.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts at this point? If not, I do have a related question for the Kings. But does anybody have anything they'd like to bring up? Dan, you're usually pretty good at jumping in. You got anything tonight?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. No, I probably do want to talk to you offline sometime about the regulation update, which we were doing, and but that's sort of different. But you know, I did the last update totally from end to end on that DVD, and we'll go over that.
That's fair enough. John and Martha, since you run a small flight school and or flight training operation out there in San Diego, and seriously, have you gotten anything from any of your customers or anybody else that, along with a local issue, anything regional or at a national level that, or just maybe a sense that there's something out there that we should be looking at and engaging our friends at the FAA?
The biggest thing that we're hearing nationally is a whole lot of hullabaloo about the changes in the simulator certification, and a great deal of concern that, on the one hand, that some of the units that used to be able to be counted for a lot more instrument time will now be limited to 10 hours, but also a lot of concern from people who already have units and who are thinking of getting units that the FAA just won't be able to make the schedule as far as getting all of the LOAs for all the manufacturers and the different units done on time. Do you have any insight into that, Phil?
Yes, actually that was discussed in today's meeting. Jim Viola, the AFS 800, who's the lead on this, and it was his organization back beginning with Bob Wright a number of years ago that first started using that alternative means of compliance using the standard. There's provision in 61.4 that says you can provide a certain amount of training, but you can also do something if it's been approved by the administrator. And it was that authorization where they started approving numbers greater than what's regulatorily permitted in Part 61. The concern that they've had that precipitated this is severalfold. One is the FAA, because of the way the approvals have been given going back as far as 30 years or more ago. For example, with the old ATC black box simulators, they were one of the first to get a national letter of authorization that actually came out of a local FSDO in New Jersey. And then over the years, there have been different offices that have generated these letters of authorization. And they quite candidly admitted they have no idea how many of those exist or what they are or what authorizations have been given. The AC that I referenced earlier came out in 2009 that it says that any device that has been certificated or approved, rather than not certificated, but approved and accepted for certain things, since 2009, those letters of authorization will continue. Those aren't being upset by this. So anybody that's gotten a device that has been accepted and received its LOA since 2009 will continue to be able to be used. Anything prior to that, the main purpose of this is to have everybody that has one of those that's using it to basically check in so they can get an assessment of what is out there. For those people, Jim committed today on the conversation that if the application under the change of policy that was announced earlier in the month that I referenced earlier, if the application for that new letter of authorization is in by July the 1st, they've made the commitment that you'll receive the revised LOA, assuming you comply with what's in the advisory circular, that you'll receive the authorization back by the deadline next January.
That's it. It's it.
Okay, so just to recap something that became as news to me, they're saying that any units that received an LOA in 2009 or later will be fine. Now, do they have to go through an exercise of getting a new LOA, or are they just keep on going?
My understanding of that is it will be a new LOA, and it'll have a 5-year expiration date. And one of the concerns that we'd found, and what NAFI tries to do, we really try to be a proponent for the professionalism of what's going on, not just anything the flight instructors say is right and we charge for it. We try to look at the balance and recognize the regulatory requirements and so on. So I reached out to several FAA ops inspectors. And one of the concerns that had come back to me out of that was that a number of the people that held LOAs weren't aware of previous requirements that you had to provide a certificate of calibration once a year to continue to use them. And there were even people within the FAA that weren't aware of that. So one of the changes they've done to try to eliminate that requirement for the calibration, and I just learned of this morning and haven't had a chance to fully research the issue, so I'm not fully knowledgeable on it, but my understanding, what was said in the meeting today is that since 2009, that calibration requirement hasn't been part of the lower level ATDs or BATDs and ATDs, and instead the 5-year lifespan of the renewed LOA is how that will be addressed. In other words, at the next 5-year period, you'll have to make a statement that it's still meeting the calibration standards and so on. But to answer your question is, yes, you will turn in your old LOA. It will expire if you don't, and you'll be reissued a new 5-year LOA.
Okay, now there are people out there with an LOA issued, for instance, in 2012 that already has the 5-year expiration. So does that just tick along until the 5 years and that comes up?
I believe that's correct because I'd have to go back and read the language of the policy change, but I think it applies only to the LOAs. I've got that handy, so what I'll do, Martha, is as we continue tonight, I'll take a quick look at that and answer that question before the end of the webinar.
Okay, thank you.
All right, great, Phil. Thanks very much. Thank you very much. There are some some other things clicking along, and Phil, I'm going to put you back on the spot for just another moment as you're trying to read and talk time now.
And clear my throat.
And clear your throat. Can you talk just for a moment about the issue with the certification in Colorado?
Okay, the certification in Colorado is a good example of the kind of regional activities where NAFI may or may not choose to get directly involved. We'll always provide support to our members and give information, and in some areas it's appropriate for us to get directly involved. This is the one I mentioned in my introduction, where a flight school came to us and said that had an application pending that hadn't been acted upon for a number of years. And I don't remember the exact number. I think it went back to 2007 for the original application. It might be 2009, but it's quite a few years. Of course, as a national organization like NAFI, we've got to be very careful that we don't just hear one side of a story and go rushing into the FAA kind of hysterically screaming, oh, you got to do something, because you never know what the full story behind the issue is. You know, maybe there's a reason that it hadn't been acted on. So what we try to do is work with a local member first and find out as much of the details that we can. And in this case, working with flight school, we got the details and the efforts they had made, and they had gone through the congressional route that had the congressman make an inquiry to the FAA and still hadn't found out what was happening. And they finally got a report back that there just wasn't the resources to work with it. So I started using my network and went back into a couple of the regions, talking with ops inspectors in the region to find out, was this a national problem? Was it a regional problem? Was it a local office problem? What was going on? And picked up a discussion that there was a national policy statement that had been put out. As I pursued that further, I found that the policy wasn't being interpreted exactly consistently from office to office and region to region. And basically, the policy change that had been announced was that the FAA, every year when they put together their annual operating plan, they have to have the budget resources to do anything that they commit to do. And, excuse me, in the area of certification, and this isn't just 141, it applies to 135 and 121 operators as well, is the standard that was put out is that if you're going to commit resources to approve a certification, you have to look not only at the resources to do the certification, but you have to have available to you the resources to do the follow-up oversight. In other words, if you create a new 141 certificate, you've got a certain amount of oversight of the certificate holder that you have to do every year. Things like the chief instructor revalidation and the review of the records and that kind of thing. And so what we've gotten into that so far is that some of the offices, if they didn't have the activity locally, were then not doing the review. What I've subsequently found out within the last 2 or 3 weeks in talking with the folks in Washington is that the original policy was put out that way, but then since then they've also added to it that if a local office doesn't have the resources, they are supposed to go out to other regions and request if somebody else has resources. An example of where this has been used is, I know with the Eclipse ATP training and adding an Eclipse to the 135 certificates, they have one national resource. It's a person out of the Boston FISDO that is doing all of the Eclipse certification in the country, and that's sort of what he's become. So even though he's a local FISDO guy, if you have an Eclipse that's being certificated, it's not going to be through the local FISDO. It's going to be that activity of adding the aircraft or adding a pilot to the certificate is going to be done through the national resource. Now, with regard to the flight school specifically in Colorado, I'm now working to try to backtrack to see within that FISDO what was the actual reason they haven't been able to act on it, and have they attempted to get resources from the national resource pool.
Okay, well, thanks for that. Is there, when we find these types of things, is there any way, well, you've already done the research, I guess, is there any sense that did you get the sense from the school that it was not just them, it was everybody, or is there some way a member could say, I think there's a problem here?
That actually is where I am in the process right now. The next edition of eMentor is going to have an article, a brief article by me explaining kind of what we're talking about tonight. And in that, I'm specifically asking any member organizations that have had what they consider to be an undue period of time to do an initial review of the 141 certificate to let us know about it. Because one of the things that in dealing with the FAA that I've found, in pretty much any regulatory body, when you come to them, you've really got to have your facts in order. It's not helpful to come in and start claiming you've got this giant problem and turn out to find that it's a single problem in a single physio in a single office that could be as simple as one employee that's not doing it, or it could be something that you may have an operator that has other issues with the office and they're not handling this issue until the other thing gets taken care of. And so to try to put a scope into it that to make it more effective to dealing with AFS, in this case 810, is to understand, are there multiple operators across multiple regions or multiple districts? Because then it puts more of a national interest into the FAA office. If it turns out to be a very local issue, then I'll work with the Washington office to connect the local operator to be connected and try to resolve the issue locally.
Okay, great. John or Martha, have you gotten any sense of any of these types of issues from any of your customers or schools that buy material from you?
We do occasionally have people who make the complaint that they're trying to get a 141 approval, and it takes them 2 or 3 years to do it. And one of my suspicions is that some people can get an approval a lot faster than others, and I suspect some cases that the physio is looking at this person and seeing how much work they're going to be to deal with. When we go to Cessna Pilot Center meetings, we have some folks who slip right through and get approval very quickly, and some who can't seem to get approval for 2 or 3 years. There's a certain amount of arbitrariness about it. But whatever it is, it shouldn't take 2 years to get anything from the FAA. I mean, we did this. The EAA and AOPA did this request for driver's license medical, and it's 2 years, and there's not been a response to it. And finally, they're beginning to address it. So it's just unconscionable that it takes that long to do business. The FAA becomes a business interruption program rather than assisting it. And it's not universal. I think it depends on the office.
So you think it may be not even at a regional level at the FAA. It could be something as simple as Phil pointed out, one employee or a policy at a local office or so on. It's capricious is the word I'm looking for.
Or some particular operator is not really in good stead with the local office, and that particular operator just can't seem to get an approval.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's a good point, John, because sometimes it's, I'll use the phrase bad blood between the ops inspector and the local. Also, in my experience of practicing law in that area, is often where I've seen the problem, it's because the applicant has just a really cavalier attitude about the whole process, and the process it's definitely a dot the I's and cross the T's kind of a process. And if you leave out parts of it that go through the initial screen, it's full of a bunch of holes, they don't have any obligation to come back and correct your certificate application. And often that becomes, or I wouldn't say often, I haven't had that many experiences with it, but it occasionally becomes contentious just for this, well, I gave you my certificate, you guys should be able to figure out what you do. And he said, no, it's your responsibility to give us all of the documentation that's required in order for us to issue the certificate. The 141 is nothing more than you telling us how you're going to do business in compliance with 141, and then our responsibility to recognize that and grant the certificate. And so that's why, as NAFI, we're not really in the role to go in and be their attorney or their consultant to prepare or move their certificate. But if we identify a problem where they appear to have complied with the various steps of the process and it's non-moving, then that's where we can get some leverage to try to move it along.
Yeah, to add, go ahead, John. No, go ahead, John.
I was going to say that Phil's absolutely right. In many cases, it's pretty straightforward, really, what you have to do to comply, and you just go just line by line. You make sure that you've complied with it. You make it easy for them; it'll go through a lot quicker. And if somebody just simply increases their workload unnecessarily, they're just simply not going to be very cooperative with it.
Well, in that case, it's going to go to the bottom of the stack, and people whose paperwork is all, I don't want to defend the FAA here, but paperwork is basically what they've got to go on. And if the paperwork isn't complete and thorough and adequate, it's human nature. It's going to go to the bottom of the stack, and they're going to work through the stuff that they can scan and say, oh yeah, that's got everything I need, rubber stamp, and so on.
Does anybody remember Dean Jagger in 12 O'Clock High? That's what it's starting to sound like. For those of you that are movie buffs, as I am, but at a national level even, having to go to the national level for a FERC approval, because I used to be the chief instructor for a FERC in the St. Louis area. Getting that paper right, and I had somebody very helpful at the FAA that would politely send it back with recommended fixes, and he was going out of his way to help. And it was if it's not right, it's not right, and their hands are tied. So
if I could jump in on that, Bob, if I could jump in on that real quickly, because you raised another point that I hadn't intended to bring up tonight, but I think it's a good example. Your example of when you took your St. Louis FERC to D.C. and they gave you help, they can be very, very helpful with you. And an example with NAFI, when we had our original Master Instructor program, and that was coming up for renewal back, it's been 2 years ago now, we had built the program initially going back to 1996 when Sean Elliott put it together and got it certificated or approved by the FAA to do your CFI renewal through the Master Instructor program. At that time, we had approached it when Sean had gone through the regulations and was trying to figure out how to approach them, used the model of a FERC, and the approval basis for that was that the activities that you report on your Master Instructor application put together an argument of a equal level of approval as a FERC, and the program existed like that. We went for the renewal 2 years ago. The FAA was working with us and suggested, guys, we really think that your approval isn't in the right area. We think that it's more appropriate under the provision in Part 61 that says you can renew a flight instructor certificate if you're a 121 check airman or in a position to evaluate pilots. And I know we were kind of stunned when they made that recommendation, because none of us had ever viewed that provision of Part 61 as having any applicability to us, because the way it's introduced as a 121 or a 135 check airman, we thought that provision was intended just to apply to air carriers. And in fact, when we went through that renewal process, that's how we got approved currently. So our program now is no longer based on a FERC model. It's based on evaluation of pilots. And what that allowed us to do was really to improve our Master Instructor program. We were able to continue almost everything we had done before in terms of activities, and we were able to expand the kinds of activities that could be included to allow you to get a Master Instructor. And so working with the FAA, rather than just plopping something on the desk and walking away and demanding they approve it, is definitely a lot more effective way of dealing with any of the offices.
I think the message there is go in with a good heart and open mind and be cautiously cooperative. Would that be a good way to say it, everybody?
I think that's a great way.
I don't even know you have to be that cautious. I mean, some people are more fun to work with than others, and if you just make it a pleasure to work with you, and you're competent, and you comply with the forms, you meet the requirements, and you make it fun to do, it's going to go a lot smoother.
That's better than the way I said it, John. That's where I was trying to go. So thank you.
John, that's a good point. You can't take them to lunch, can't buy them a beer, so at least have fun when you're working with them.
So because we got about 20, 25 people on the call with us, I know there's a lot of great minds out there, and a great opportunity to ask any questions or toss out great thoughts. Does anybody have anything? I think we stunned them.
I'm going to throw something in here.
Please do, because I think we stunned them into silence.
Well, you know, Martha and I had a friend. We still have a friend somewhere. But this guy was the chairman of the board of the corporation that runs the safety authority in Australia. It's they in Australia have a corporation for the rulemaking part of the FAA and a corporation for air traffic control. And this guy was the chairman of the board of the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, the equivalent of the FAA, and he was really the equivalent of the administrator of the FAA. And he happened to be a good flying buddy of ours, and we got really on the inside track. And one of the things that they don't have in Australia is NAFI. They don't have a strong AOPA. They have an AOPA, but not a strong AOPA. And so when in Australia they want to do a restricted area, they just do a restricted area. But in the United States, when they're proposing a restricted area, they'll meet with the people like NAFI, they'll meet with AOPA, and there'll be a dialogue about, well, how about if we cut this corner? How about if we change the altitude a little bit? And as a result of that, it doesn't seem like it many times, but the FAA in the United States has a culture of collaboration with folks like NAFI, NBAA, AOPA, and these organizations are terribly, terribly important to our being able to work effectively with the FAA. And if there's, and just having observed the contrast in other areas of the world and seeing in the United States, we really, really do have general aviation in a way that the rest of the world doesn't. And one of the reasons is because of the work that you guys are doing.
Well, that's very kind of you, John. I really appreciate it. I think, and I think the positive press that folks like you or the other companies put out there and the assistance we get helps quite a bit. And when I say we, I don't mean just NAFI, but all the alphabet soup groups. We are a team all together, an ad hoc team, and that's one of the reasons we have this call, and we're asking our members to participate and point things out to us that we may have overlooked. It's a great big world, and I don't think anybody, even in your case with the local San Diego folks, I don't think there's any bad intent there. Yes, it's a feel-good piece of legislation, but it doesn't seem like, at a local level, they're probably going, well, we got to fix a problem. And they may not realize what a problem they're causing by trying to address another problem. So this is where we need to work together and help each other out.
Well, it really makes a difference. We've been fortunate. When you can't hold a heading, you get to fly at a lot of different places, and and so we've been in a lot of countries of the world, and there's no system like the United States. And I really do think a major part of it is the fact that the alphabet soup organizations have involved in and continually involved in a dialogue with the FAA.
Because NAFI is one of the smaller of the large groups, just by the nature, there's fewer instructors than there are pilots and so on. I think we can't, AOPA can drum up 600,000 members or whatever their numbers are, and we're not quite that big, obviously. But would it be fair to say that because we're instructors and because we live, I'll just say live, I won't go to the negative side, we live by regulation, is it more likely we're going to spot a trend before anybody else does, or are we really in a position to be on the leading edge to help protect our privilege and rights to fly?
fellow instructors are probably the most committed and most knowledgeable segment of the aviation and pilot community.
Okay. Phil, do you have anything you want to add to that one?
No, I just agree with it. I think we are in a good position with that. And I think a unique thing that I found with NAFI, I've been doing this industry government stuff going way back to the early 90s, working with NATA and then later with NAFI. And having gotten to see and work with a number of groups over the years, I think NAFI's, when it comes to regulatory pilot training and to a pretty good extent, Part 60 or Part 91 operations, I think NAFI is in a kind of special place with regard to the alphabet groups at the FAA, simply because I think we're more than any of the other groups viewed as a neutral arbiter of what's going on. I know in my experience, very often we'll get a call from somebody that's working an issue at FAA, and they're being pounded by AOPA or NBAA or others, and they'll come to us and say, what do you guys really think about this? Where do you come out on it? And I think that's something that in my work with NAFI, I certainly hold the value of it, and I'm careful not to damage that by going off half-cocked on issues, but to try to educate ourselves on what's really happening. And that's where our members are invaluable to us, because we're, as you point out, a small organization, and we're pretty reliant on our members bringing information to us to be able to inform us of a broader picture rather than just what we're seeing locally.
Okay, thanks, Phil.
Bob, this is John, the other John in California.
John Gibson, everybody.
I wanted to weigh in on those comments about NAFI's effectiveness with the FAA, and I think we would all agree that with the pressure on budgets, that's some of what's causing some of the challenges that we've had with the FAA. And I think it's going to be, the point I wanted to make is I think it's going to be ever more important that we do a good job in that area, because I think the pressure is going to be on the FAA, and the challenges for them to get what we need done. Back to John King's earlier point is we don't want them to get in the way. We don't want them to be in the business prevention business.
And a good example, John, of things that we're working on with that is the sequestration and the budget cuts have really affected the impact of the FAA. Congress is quick to give them vast new requirements. The ATP 121 flight time, duty time rules being a good example. The amount of workload that created to create the rules and now to enforce the rules and to deal with the myriad of changes that have to take place to get the flight time, duty time implemented has created tremendous workload. But then at the same time, as they were leading up to the final attack on that, we went into sequestration that put them 2.5 weeks behind schedule and everything, and now made it a permanent backlog that's going to take forever to work off. So one of the things that is an example of how NAFI can help them, we have a project of rewriting the various flight training endorsements. We've had a little book that we've had out there for several years, and it was pretty good for where it was. It was good enough that the FAA, based on that, had not revised AC 6561 for the last two revision periods. It's been an out-of-date AC for quite some time, simply because they were using our endorsement guide for the endorsements that are in it. But we recognized last summer when we started reviewing it, it was the idea of reprinting it, that there were some technical issues in our book, and there are also some endorsements that are missing that really should be in there. And that started a wholesale review of NAFI putting out a revised endorsement guide that'll be corrected, it'll be improved, it'll include more material. And then in working with the FAA, when I went to them to try to set up a process that when we came up with the draft of it, that they would give their imprimatur on it so that we could go forward knowing that they were in agreement with it, has led to discussions now where it appears that we're going to be working together so that they'll actually issue it. Both NAFI will issue our guide, but then that will drive a revised advisory circular, and they're more than happy to have the resource helping them to work on that activity. So areas like that where we can work with the FAA and provide the FAA some support, I think just really helps build a relationship in the whole industry within the commercial and general aviation division of FAA, which is where pretty much everything that affects GA comes from.
Okay, thanks, Phil. We have a question from, and I hope I pronounce this right, from Hank Eng, E-N-G. He asks, has there been any thought about designated inspectors for 141, 35, 140 operators that could be approved by the FAA? In other words, we have designated DPEs and so on. Has there been any thought about contracting some of that out? Or has anybody made that suggestion to the FAA to help take some of the workload?
I'm not aware of it. There is a little bit of that authority that's available on request and approval under 141, but it is used in other areas. It's used in designated maintenance examiners. It's used in, the design, I forget the title, but under the engineering division for approval of modifications to airplanes and so on. So the concept is certainly there. I'm not aware of any, though, that's been actively pursued, but it sounds like a good idea.
I think it's a great idea. I think I'm going to add that to your inbox there, Phil. Sorry. So, all right. Well, we've been here for about an hour. Phil, can you just talk just about 2 seconds about anything? And this is a little bit unfair to you. I apologize, but do you want to talk a little bit about any help that you may be asking of the members? That is there an opportunity for members to volunteer to pitch in and help you out at any level?
There are at various times and places. There will be the email that's coming out, an eMentor. I thought came out today, but maybe Bob, you can tell us when that's going to. The next eMentor is coming up.
It should be in your inbox, Phil.
Oh, okay. I looked a little bit earlier. But it'll have a couple of specific requests related to what we were talking about tonight. And the biggest area on an ongoing basis that we need is folks to take the pulse of what's going on locally with things and give us feedback. Some areas I know that are under discussion that may require some volunteer work. One of them is half regulatory and half administrative. Is we've had discussions about adding an additional master CFI designation, and depending on where that goes, we may need some help developing the standard, the language that goes into it, and that's something we'll be looking forward to. But the kinds of things that we mostly need are right now are the folks in San Diego to get involved. So if there's anybody out there, it would really be good to have a local point of contact that could take the lead, that we could provide support to, because we're simply not in a position to take the lead on that activity. But someone that we could work with to then go address, talk with, argue with, if necessary, with the local council. And then the other one is bringing attention about any issues, if they look like a systemic issue, of 141 certification. Those are the two things that are hot on the plate. Then the third one I mentioned earlier, and I'll have more about this once the notice comes out officially, is they're going to be inviting folks on the ARAC to participate in the revision of the ATP certification standards. And so that'll be something that I'll definitely be asking for support on. That I would ask that if you're interested, really read the request or the notice when it comes out, to make sure that you have expertise in the areas that they're requesting input on. And
Great.
If you're interested, then I can give you guidance as to how to put your name in the hat to get chosen to work on that committee.
Okay, Phil, thank you very much. John, Martha, we've come up on the end of the hour. Any thoughts from your end, from warm, sunny California, as I sit here in Omaha?
Well, the biggest thing I would like to comment on is that NAFI has been important in this aviation certification standards change of the PTS to aviation certification standards, and been a very, very positive influence on it. And I think that's going to be terribly important. Up until now, the FAA test questions have been obscure, very remote, sometimes clever, tricky. And the whole idea of the Airman Certification Standards is that everything that is being done has to do with making a safer, more capable pilot. And if the question doesn't have to do with the pilot's ability to manage the risks of flights, the FAA can't ask about it. NAFI has been instrumental in getting this done, and I think it'll be the biggest hope we have of improving the accident record in aviation in the next 10 years.
Huh. Thank you very much. That's a huge compliment. Martha, do you have anything you want to add? Or?
Well, just basically that we need to do everything we can to encourage people who become aware of issues at the local level to get in touch with NAFI or other organizations that have probably run into a similar situation in some other location, and therefore have a background and a strategy for attack or defense, as the case may be, some experience at it that would be helpful, and just make sure that people don't just look at things that are happening locally and shrug their shoulders and say that's the way it goes, because you can stop things, you can change things, but you can't do it generally all by yourself, and the national organizations can't do anything if you wait until 5 minutes before the council meeting is supposed to start and then start sending emails saying, help me please.
Great points. Thank you very much. Everybody who's on a computer, under my photograph and under Phil's, I've put our email addresses, and feel free to send comments, thoughts, complaints. Send the complaints to Phil. Just kidding. Comments, thoughts, and so on to us, and we'll do our best to respond and help you out. I really do appreciate a couple of John and Martha King. Let me try this again. I really appreciate John and Martha King joining us. They've become good friends in the past few years, and friends of the organization, and I'm proud to say friends of mine. And guys, I really appreciate you coming out tonight. I know your schedules are very busy, and it's much appreciated. And Phil, thank you very much.
Okay, and to finish with the two only blimp pilots I know, which, by the way, is the one rating I'd give my eye teeth to have. If you're not aware, just starting at this moment on public television is the Zeppelin terror attacks in World War I, a new program. So I'm out of here.
Okay. Okay. Everybody have a good night. Safe flying. Stay warm if you're in a cold climate, and if you're in a warm climate, feel sorry for the rest of us. Have a great month. We'll see you all next month.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Thank you much.
Thanks,
Thank you.